The country of Spain is incredibly diverse. For example, when you go up into the northern regions of the country, people typically have higher levels of Celtic or North Atlantic DNA. And when you go down towards the south, towards Andalusia, people typically have higher levels of North African related admixture. Guys, you know, the really interesting thing about the Spanish people is that they're like a combination between this Mediterranean influence with this Celtic DNA component. We are going to look at the Spanish genome through a variety of different time periods to understand who these people are from a genetic perspective. Over here, I've got a Stone Age DNA breakdown of the average Spanish genome. And interestingly, what we see is that around 12% of their DNA is Western hunter-gatherer related. Now, the Western hunter-gatherers were one of the first people who inhabited Europe, and they contribute substantially to most Northern European genomes. Now, what's interesting about the Spanish is that compared to other Mediterranean populations, they typically have higher levels of this Western hunter-gatherer DNA component. And the reason is simple. Spain is incredibly old. As a matter of fact, it was the key location for the dispersal of humans across Europe. But if we look closely at this breakdown, we can actually see that the vast majority of their DNA is early European farmer related. Around 7,500 years ago, farmers from what is now Anatolia started to migrate all across Europe. And by doing so, they outcompeted the Western hunter-gatherers who lived there. And this is the reason why, guys, the Spanish have a very distinctive Mediterranean look. It's this Anatolian Neolithic component that makes people look Mediterranean. It's found in the Greeks, it's found in the Italians, it's found in the Lebanese, and just like the rest of the Mediterranean, it's also found in the Spanish. Around 5,000 years ago, there was yet another migration. This time, it was characterized by steppe pastoralists who originated in a part of the world known as the Pontic-Caspian steppe. When these Indo-Europeans arrive in Central Europe, they eventually develop into the Celtic cultures. And it's actually these Celts who start to migrate within Iberia. By doing so, they mix with the local Iberian population to form an infusion culture known as the Celt-Iberians. That's why when we look at the Spanish genome through a Bronze Age perspective, around 20% of their DNA is Celtic related. Now, obviously, during the Iron Age, there were a slew of migrations which changed the Spanish genome. For example, you had the expansion of Carthage. Carthage was a North African empire and they spread influence into Iberia. That's why the average Spanish has around 10% North African related ancestry. It's not just because of the Moors. You also had the expansion of the Roman Empire. And by doing so, they introduced a distinctively Italic component within the Iberian population. That's why when we look at the Spanish genome through an Iron Age perspective, around 10 to 17% of their DNA is specifically Roman derived. Now, when the Roman Empire collapses, there were a slew of Germanic people who start to take advantage of this decaying empire. And some of these Germanic groups like the Alans, the Suevi, and the Visigoths actually set up kingdoms in Iberia. By doing so, they introduced a very small Germanic component within the Iberian population. The average Spaniard has anywhere between 0 to 5% Germanic ancestry. It's really not that much. But then you had the expansion of the Moors. The Moors set up kingdoms like Al-Andalus and the Emirate of Cordoba. And by doing so, they contributed additionally to this North African component that's found within Iberia. And interestingly, when we go down to the Canary Islands, the Canary Islanders have anywhere between 12 to 20% North African related ancestry. And this is not because of just the Moors, it's also because of the indigenous Gaunch people who inhabited that island before the arrival of the Spanish. So I guess on a very broad level, guys, these are the key migratory events that impacted the Spanish genome. Obviously, there were a slew of other migrations that I didn't cover, like you had the expansion of the Phoenicians during the Bronze Age. In more contemporary time periods, you had the migration of the Khalil of Iberia, the Sephardic Jews. But in a general kind of perspective, these were the key migrations that impacted the Spanish genome. Guys, I really like Spain. I really like learning about the history, the culture here. I mean, we're here today in the lovely city of Madrid as well. So that's the reason why I decided to create this video.